Alexander Everett couldn't remember when he had last felt this uncomfortable. The weight of his custom Armani suit suddenly seemed suffocating as he navigated through the sea of wedding guests, all of whom seemed determined to engage him in conversation he had no interest in having. As the founder and CEO of Everett Technologies, worth an estimated $2.3 billion, Alexander had perfected the art of commanding boardrooms, but social gatherings, especially weddings, were an entirely different battlefield. "Another drink, Mr. Everett?" A server appeared at his side, offering a tray of champagne. "Thank you," he said, taking a flute and retreating to the farthest corner of the luxurious ballroom. His best friend James deserved his presence at this wedding, but Alexander had made it clear he wanted to keep a low profile. The last thing he needed was ambitious business associates or gold-digging wedding guests cornering him with pitches or flirtations. Finding a secluded alcove partially hidden by an elaborate floral arrangement, Alexander loosened his tie slightly and checked his watch. 3 more hours. He could survive 3 more hours. "Hiding too?" A melodic voice broke through his thoughts. Alexander looked up, startled to find a woman standing beside him, her emerald green dress complementing eyes of the same striking color. Her dark auburn hair was swept into an elegant updo, a few tendrils framing her face. "I'm not hiding," he responded instinctively, straightening his posture. "I'm simply observing." She laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Well, you've found the best observation post in the room. I'm Grace, by the way, Grace Harrington." "Alexander Everett," he replied, expecting the usual flicker of recognition and calculated interest that typically followed his introduction. Instead, Grace simply nodded and took a sip of her champagne. "Nice to meet you, Alexander. How do you know the happy couple?" Alexander studied her, surprised by her apparent lack of reaction to his name. Either she was an exceptionally good actress, or she genuinely had no idea who he was. Both possibilities intrigued him. "James and I have been friends since college. You?" "I'm the wedding planner," she confessed with a small smile. "This is actually my first moment to breathe all day." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "And you're spending your break hiding in a corner with me?" "The bride's grandmother has been trying to set me up with her grandson for the past 3 hours," Grace explained with a grimace. "He collects taxidermied rodents dressed as historical figures and talks exclusively about his fantasy football league." Despite himself, Alexander laughed, a genuine laugh that felt foreign after months of practiced business chuckles and polite smiles. "That does sound horrifying," he admitted, "although I've been dodging my share of persistent conversations as well." Grace tilted her head curiously. "Let me guess. You're either recently divorced, and every woman here can sense it like sharks smelling blood, or you're important enough that everyone wants a piece of your time." Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. "The latter, though I'm surprised you'd say that, considering you didn't seem to recognize my name." "Oh, I recognized it immediately," Grace said, her green eyes twinkling. "Alexander Everett, tech genius and billionaire extraordinaire. Your face has been on the cover of Forbes twice this year alone, but I figured you came to your friend's wedding to be Alexander, not Mr. Everett of Everett Technologies." For a moment, Alexander was speechless. In his world of calculated business moves and strategic social interactions, Grace Harrington's honesty was as refreshing as it was disarming. Before he could respond, she glanced at her watch and sighed. "Break's over. The cake cutting is in 15 minutes, and I need to make sure the photographer is positioned correctly." She set her barely touched champagne on a nearby table. "It was nice meeting you, Alexander. Enjoy the rest of your hiding, observing." With that, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd with efficient grace. Alexander watched her go, realizing he was smiling. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of genuine interest in someone that had nothing to do with business acquisitions or strategic partnerships. He spent the next hour actually paying attention to the wedding festivities, finding himself scanning the room for glimpses of the auburn-haired wedding planner. He spotted her orchestrating the cake cutting with subtle hand signals to the staff, calming a flower girl's tantrum with a small gift produced from some hidden pocket, and tactfully steering an increasingly inebriated groomsman away from the microphone. When the dancing began, Alexander found himself approaching her as she stood at the edge of the dance floor, clipboard in hand, watching the festivities with a satisfied expression. "Your work is impressive," he said, startling her slightly. "The wedding is beautiful." Grace turned, surprise evident on her face. "Thank you, though I can't take credit for the bride's excellent taste." "I meant your crisis management skills," Alexander clarified. "The flower girl meltdown, the drunk groomsman, the mother of the bride nearly tripping during her entrance. You handled it all so seamlessly, most guests didn't even notice." She smiled, a hint of pride in her expression. "That's the highest compliment a wedding planner can receive. Most of my job is preventing disasters before they happen, and mitigating the ones I can't prevent." "Sounds a lot like running a corporation," he observed. "Except my staff goes home after the wedding, and I don't have shareholders to please," Grace replied. "Though I imagine your disasters involve a few more zeros than mine." "More zeros, but fewer emotional breakdowns in bathroom stalls," Alexander said dryly. Grace laughed, then glanced at her clipboard. "I should check on the dance with me first," Alexander said, surprising even himself with the request. She hesitated, looking around at the packed dance floor. "I don't usually socialize with guests, professional boundaries and all that." "I'm not technically a guest," Alexander pointed out. "I'm the groom's friend, who happens to be at the wedding he planned. One dance. Consider it market research on the success of your event." Grace's lips curved into a smile. "Market research? That's a creative approach, Mr. Everett." "Alexander," he corrected. "Alexander," she repeated, setting down her clipboard on a nearby chair. "One dance, for research purposes." He led her onto the dance floor just as the band transitioned to a slower song. When he placed his hand on the small of her back, Alexander was surprised by how natural it felt to hold her. They moved together effortlessly, as if they'd danced 100 times before. "So, how did you get into wedding planning?" he asked, genuinely curious about her. "My background is actually in corporate event management," she explained. "I worked for a major hotel chain organizing conferences and galas. But after planning my sister's wedding 3 years ago, I realized I love the personal touch of weddings, helping couples create memories they'll cherish forever." "That's quite a departure from corporate events," Alexander noted. Grace shrugged slightly. "The principles are the same: logistics, vendor management, crisis prevention. But weddings have heart. I was tired of planning events where success was measured by how many business cards people exchanged. And now success is measured by the number of happy tears and genuine smiles," she finished. "Much more satisfying." The song ended too quickly, and Grace stepped back. "Thank you for the research opportunity," she said with a smile. "But I really should get back to work." Alexander nodded, reluctant to end their conversation. "Would you consider having dinner with me tomorrow night?" Grace looked genuinely surprised by his invitation. "I don't date clients, Alexander." "I'm not your client," he pointed out. "James and Melissa are." "A technicality," she said, though he could see her resolve wavering. "I'm very good with technicalities. They've made me quite successful," Alexander replied with a smile. "Just dinner, no strings attached." Grace studied him for a long moment. "Why me? You could have dinner with literally anyone." The question caught him off guard with its directness. "Because you're the first person in years who's talked to me like I'm just a man at a wedding, not a walking investment opportunity." His honesty seemed to surprise her as much as her question had surprised him. After a moment, she nodded. "Okay, dinner. But I warn you I have a rule about second dates. Which is, I need to be completely myself on the first date. If you still want a second one after getting to know the real me, then we might have something worth pursuing." Alexander felt a genuine smile spread across his face. "I look forward to meeting the real Grace Harrington." The following evening, Alexander found himself unusually nervous as he waited for Grace in the intimate restaurant he'd selected. He'd chosen La Maison not for its Michelin star or exclusivity, but because it offered private dining nooks where conversations weren't overheard and patrons weren't constantly interrupted. When Grace arrived, Alexander was momentarily stunned. Her work attire at the wedding had been elegant but practical. Tonight, she wore a simple blue dress that made her eyes appear even more vibrant, her auburn hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. "I'm not late, am I?" she asked, glancing at her watch as she approached. "Not at all," Alexander assured her, standing to greet her. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she said with a small smile. This is quite a place, though I'm surprised you didn't choose somewhere more elaborate. Alexander held her chair as she sat. Did you expect a helicopter ride to a private island for dinner? Grace laughed. Maybe not that extreme, but billionaires aren't exactly known for their understated first date choices. I thought you might appreciate someplace where we could actually talk, he explained. And the food here is incredible without the pretension of some high-profile restaurants. I'm impressed, Grace admitted as she unfolded her napkin. Most wealthy men I've encountered professionally, of course, seem determined to showcase their status at every opportunity. I have nothing to prove to you, Alexander said simply. Besides, I've found that the people worth knowing aren't impressed by displays of wealth. Their conversation flowed easily through appetizers and into the main course. Alexander found himself sharing stories about the early days of his company, the sleepless nights coding in his garage apartment, and the terrifying leap of faith when he quit his stable job to pursue his tech vision full-time. Grace, true to her word about being herself, told him about her childhood in a small Connecticut town, her disastrous first attempt at wedding planning for a college friend. The cake melted, the best man lost the rings, and someone's grandmother broke her hip doing the Macarena. And her dream of eventually opening a venue specifically designed for smaller, more intimate weddings. I love the grand affairs, but there's something special about the smaller celebrations where you can feel the connection between everyone present, she explained passionately. Why haven't you pursued that yet? Alexander asked, finding her enthusiasm infectious. Grace sighed. The economics don't quite work out. Small weddings mean smaller budgets, which means I'd need more of them to sustain the business. And real estate in or around the city suitable for a venue is prohibitively expensive. Alexander nodded, understanding her dilemma. Have you considered partnerships with existing properties, historic homes, boutique hotels, or even private estates that might be interested in hosting events? I've explored a few options, but finding the right partner is challenging, Grace admitted. Most established venues already have preferred planners, and breaking into those relationships takes time. Their conversation continued through dessert and coffee, neither of them noticing as the restaurant gradually emptied around them. When the waiter discreetly informed them they were closing, both were surprised to discover it was nearly midnight. I had no idea it was so late, Grace said as they walked together toward the exit. I have a consultation at 9 tomorrow morning. Outside, Alexander's driver was waiting with the car. May I give you a ride home? He offered. Grace hesitated only briefly before nodding. That would be nice, thank you. During the drive to her apartment in the West Village, a comfortable silence settled between them. When they arrived, Alexander walked her to her door. I had a wonderful evening, he said sincerely. So did I, Grace admitted, a soft smile playing on her lips. Much better than I expected, if I'm being honest. Does that mean I've earned a second date? Alexander asked, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically uncertain. Grace looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the soft lighting of her building's entryway. Definitely. You've met the real me, and you're still here. I'm not just still here, Alexander said quietly. I'm more interested than ever. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Alexander leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back. Instead, Grace rose slightly on her toes, meeting him halfway for a kiss that was soft and brief, yet somehow promised more. Good night, Alexander, she whispered as she pulled away. Good night, Grace. As his car pulled away from her building, Alexander realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so content after an evening with someone. There had been no discussions of his company's valuation, no not-so-subtle inquiries about his investment portfolio, no carefully orchestrated scenarios designed to impress him. Just conversation, laughter, and a connection that felt remarkably genuine. Over the next 2 months, Alexander and Grace continued to see each other, their relationship deepening with each encounter. They discovered a shared love of obscure documentaries, spicy Thai food, and early morning walks through the city when it was just beginning to wake up. Grace introduced Alexander to her world of creative chaos, last-minute venue changes, emotional brides, and the satisfaction of watching months of planning unfold into perfect moments. He found himself genuinely interested in her work, appreciating her ability to manage complex logistics while never losing sight of the human element. In turn, Alexander showed Grace glimpses of his world, the pressure of quarterly earnings reports, the thrill of launching a new product, and the weight of responsibility for thousands of employees. She never seemed intimidated by his success or position, often challenging his perspectives and offering insights that made him see situations from entirely new angles. "You should consider implementing more flexible work arrangements for your team," she suggested one evening as they discussed a retention problem in one of his divisions. "From what you've described, they're burning out because they're measuring dedication by hours at the desk rather than actual productivity." Alexander considered her point. "We've always had a traditional work structure. Change like that would require a significant cultural shift." "And," Grace challenged, raising an eyebrow, "you completely transformed how people interact with technology. Surely you can transform how your own company works." He laughed, reaching across the table to take her hand. "When you put it that way, it seems ridiculous not to try." It was moments like these that made Alexander realize how much he valued Grace's perspective. She saw things differently not because she was trying to impress him or gain favor, but because her mind naturally approached problems from unique angles. 3 months into their relationship, Alexander faced a significant crisis at his company. A critical software update had revealed a potential security vulnerability that affected millions of users. He spent 72 hours straight at the office, coordinating emergency patches and managing the PR fallout. When he finally returned to his penthouse apartment, exhausted and demoralized, he found Grace waiting for him. She had used the key he'd given her the previous week to let herself in. "I thought you might need this," she said simply, leading him to his bathroom, where she'd prepared a hot bath, scented with eucalyptus oil. On the counter sat a plate of his favorite sandwiches from the deli 2 blocks away. "How did you know?" he asked, genuinely touched by her thoughtfulness. Grace smiled. "I've been following the news, and you haven't answered my text for 3 days, which isn't like you. I figured you were either dealing with a security crisis or you decided to become a monk and taken a vow of silence." Despite his exhaustion, Alexander laughed. "I'm sorry about the texts. It's been—" "I know," she said, kissing him softly. "You don't need to explain. Just take care of yourself, okay? The company needs you at your best." As he soaked in the bath, eating the sandwich Grace had brought, Alexander realized something profound. In his entire adult life, no one had ever simply taken care of him without expecting something in return. Grace's actions weren't calculated to impress him or create leverage. She simply saw a need and addressed it. Later that night, as they lay together in his bed, Grace's head resting on his chest, Alexander knew he was falling in love with her. The realization didn't terrify him, as it might have once. Instead, it filled him with a quiet certainty. "Move in with me," he said softly into the darkness. Grace lifted her head to look at him. "What?" "Move in with me," he repeated. "I know it's only been a few months, but I've never been more certain about anything or anyone." Grace sat up, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the windows. "Alexander, your life is so different from mine. Are you sure you're ready for me to be in your space permanently? I'm messy sometimes. I talk to myself when I'm working through wedding logistics. I sing terribly in the shower." "I know all of that," he said with a smile. "I've seen your apartment, remember? And I've heard your shower performances." She laughed softly, then grew serious. "What about your world? The board members, the investors, the society pages? Dating the wedding planner is one thing, but having her move into the penthouse is another." Alexander sat up, taking her hands in his. "Grace, do you think I care what any of those people think? Before I met you, my life was perfectly ordered, efficiently managed, and completely hollow. You've brought warmth and reality and perspective I never knew I needed." Grace's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said firmly. 2 weeks later, Grace's books, clothes, and collection of vintage wedding veils, a professional curiosity that had become a hobby, found their place in Alexander's penthouse. Their life together fell into a rhythm that somehow enhanced rather than disrupted both their busy careers. Alexander found himself becoming more efficient at work, delegating more effectively, and making time for what truly mattered both in his company and his personal life. Grace's business flourished as she gained a reputation for creating intimate, meaningful weddings that reflected each couple's unique story. 6 months after moving in together, Alexander invited Grace for a weekend getaway to his rarely used vacation home in the Hamptons. The property, which he had purchased more as an investment than a retreat, sat on 2 acres of land with direct beach access. "This is incredible," Grace exclaimed as they arrived on Friday evening. "Why don't we come here more often?" Alexander shrugged, carrying their bags into the house. "I've never really taken the time off. It seemed pointless to maintain a vacation home I rarely used, but my financial advisor insisted it was a good investment." As Grace explored the spacious home with its panoramic ocean views, Alexander watched her with growing certainty about the decision he had made. The following morning, after breakfast on the terrace overlooking the Atlantic, Alexander suggested a walk on the beach. The September air was crisp but pleasant, the summer crowds long gone. "I've been thinking," Alexander said as they walked hand in hand along the shoreline. "A dangerous pastime," Grace teased, bumping her shoulder against his. He smiled. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about wanting to create a venue for smaller, more intimate weddings." Grace's expression softened. "My pipe dream." "What about it?" "What if it wasn't a pipe dream?" Alexander stopped walking, turning to face her. "What if this property could be that venue?" Grace looked at him in confusion, then at the house visible on the bluff above them. "Your Hamptons house? Alexander, that's your vacation home." "That I never use," he reminded her. "The property is perfect exclusive location, stunning views, enough indoor and outdoor space to accommodate various configurations. It would need some renovations to optimize it for events, but structurally, it's ideal." Grace stared at him, speechless for perhaps the first time since he'd known her. "You could create exactly the kind of venue you've described," Alexander continued. "Intimate, personal, meaningful. We could form a separate company for it, with you as the majority owner and creative director." "Alexander, I can't accept something like this," Grace finally managed. "It's too much. That property must be worth—" "It's not about the money," he interrupted gently. "It's about creating something meaningful together, something that combines your vision with my resources. A partnership." "A partnership," she repeated, considering the word. "Yes," Alexander said, reaching into his pocket. "In fact, I was hoping for several kinds of partnerships with you." As he knelt on one knee in the sand, Grace's hands flew to her mouth. Alexander opened the small velvet box he had been carrying for weeks, revealing a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. "Grace Harrington, I never expected to find you. I went to my friend's wedding, determined to keep my distance from everyone, to endure the event and leave unchanged. Instead, I met a woman who saw beyond my wealth and position to the person underneath. You've brought joy, perspective, and love into my life that I never knew was missing." Tears streamed down Grace's face as Alexander continued. "I love your creativity, your honesty, your independence. I love how you care for others while maintaining your own boundaries. I love that you're never intimidated by me or my world, and that you've created such a remarkable life on your own terms." He took a deep breath. "I don't want to change who you are or what you do. I want to build a life with you where we both continue to grow and pursue our passions together. Will you marry me?" Grace was nodding before he even finished the question. "Yes," she managed through her tears. "Yes, of course I'll marry you, Alexander." As he slid the ring onto her finger and rose to his feet, Grace threw her arms around him. "I love you," she whispered against his lips before kissing him deeply. Later, as they sat on the terrace discussing possibilities for transforming the property into Grace's dream venue, she suddenly laughed. "What's funny?" Alexander asked. "Just the irony," she explained. "I've planned hundreds of weddings, helped countless couples create their perfect day. And now, I'm planning my own wedding to a man I met while working at someone else's wedding." Alexander smiled, taking her hand. "Speaking of which, how do you feel about being on the other side of the planning process? Will it be strange to be the bride instead of the coordinator?" Grace considered the question. "Actually, I think I want something very simple." After seeing so many elaborate celebrations, I know that what matters isn't the perfect centerpieces or the most expensive menu. What does matter? Alexander asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Being surrounded by people who truly care about us, promising to build a life together, and then actually doing it, she said simply. The wedding is just one day. I'm much more interested in all the days that follow. Alexander lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the emerald ring that now adorned her finger. So am I. 1 year later, Alexander and Grace Everett stood together on the terrace of what was now officially Harrington House, the exclusive intimate wedding venue that had already gained recognition for its personalized approach and stunning setting. The renovations had transformed the property while preserving its charm, and Grace's vision had created a space where couples could truly celebrate their unique love stories. Their own wedding, held on the property 6 months earlier, had been exactly as Grace had described, simple, meaningful, and surrounded by their closest friends and family. James had served as Alexander's best man, coming full circle from the wedding where they had first met. "Penny for your thoughts," Grace said, joining Alexander at the railing as the sun began to set over the ocean. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now from 2 years ago," he replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I was so focused on building my company that I never considered what I might be missing." Grace leaned into him. "And now? Now I have everything I never knew I wanted," he said honestly. "A partner who challenges me, a purpose beyond quarterly profits, and a life that's full in ways money could never provide." "Speaking of fullness," Grace said with a smile, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach, "we should probably start thinking about converting one of the guest rooms into a nursery." Alexander froze, his eyes widening as he processed her words. "Are you saying—" Grace nodded, her eyes shimmering with happy tears. "I found out yesterday. We're having a baby." The joy that overwhelmed Alexander in that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced, greater than closing his first major deal, more profound than seeing his company go public, more complete than any professional achievement he had ever accomplished. As he held his wife close, overlooking the ocean from the home they had transformed together, Alexander Everett, billionaire tech genius and notorious workaholic, felt true contentment. The quiet he had so desperately sought at his friend's wedding 2 years ago had led him not to isolation, but to the most meaningful connection of his life. "I love you," he whispered against Grace's hair. "Both of you." In the gathering twilight, with the promise of their future growing between them, Alexander and Grace stood together, a testament to the unexpected ways love can find us, even when we're trying our hardest to avoid it.